So I was going to continue on with what we talked about last week. We're talking about how it's really important that we use this human form of life for a spiritual development and actually take it quite seriously, try it every day and practice mantra meditation. Because, you know, we never know what's going to happen in our lives. And if we're attached to this world, we were talking about a person called Bharat Maharaja, who was a saintly king, and he was really renounced and left the Vedic system. And you leave home about age 50, 55, and you go to the forest and you spend the latter part of your life in spiritual development, trying to rest your heart and mind and re-establish your relationship with God. And so he renounced his whole kingdom and everything and went to the forest. But as some of you were here last week, you'd remember, he was looking after a deer who was, its mother deer died, and so he was looking after the baby deer. And you know, little fawns, right? They're really cute. And they have big brown eyes and everything. And when he was leaving this world, when he was God dying, leaving this world, the soul leaves the world. You don't ever die. He was looking into the eyes of his little deer, and he took birth as a deer. But because he was spiritually realized, and you know, he'd advanced so much spiritually before this kind of slide down, he remembered what had happened, and he hung out as a deer. And then the next life he took, he acted deaf and dumb. He didn't want to. He wasn't going to fall for it again. He didn't want anybody to get attached to him, and so on. And so I was explaining how he had really, both his parents had died, and he had a rather cruel stepmother and cruel stepbrothers. And so they treated him really poorly. People in general treated him really poorly. They would spit on him and, you know, abuse him, call him names and so on. And this family would just give him, you know, burnt, dried rice from the bottom of the pot and, you know, just like really shit kind of life, right? And he just tolerated it all, wasn't fazed by any of it, you know, didn't care. He knew, I'm not this body. It's not happening to me, you know, I'm an eternal spiritual being. People do what they like, whatever, it's not going to affect me. They would put him to work in the fields, and he became really strong, physically really strong. He was really mentally and spiritually strong. Anyway, he was needed to, a king was being carried on a palanquin, and so one of the people, something happened, and so they needed someone else, and they saw the Jada Bharat in the field and figured, okay, he looks strong, and you know, he's young and he's fit, and so we'll get him. And so he was like, okay, you know, didn't have any issue about holding a palanquin. You know, it's like you've seen them in the old days, right? The king's riding, it must be heavy, right? Now on a pole and an elaborate seat, and you know, he's got 4 people taking him along the path. But Jada Bharat was concerned about the ants on the path, and so he was, you know, stepping over them, and you know, like making sure he didn't step on them, and you know, make sure he'd step right over them and stuff. And so the king was being tossed around a bit. That's pretty much where we got to last time. And so the king stopped, and it's like, you know, stop doing this. You know, this is a really bum ride. You know, I'm going to. And he abused Jada Bharat, and with quite harsh words, and was really sarcastic, quite horrible. And you know, he said he was like, you know, he's going to chastise them, and you know, just all sorts of really totally unnecessary way of treating somebody who was just trying not to kill the ants on the path. And so the king, what I wanted to read, but was some of the things the king said to him, the sarcastic remarks. And then Jada Bharat spoke for the first time and enlightened the king. And he used his remarks to express spiritual knowledge, right? So, you know, This is not just a story, this is something that applies in our daily life also. You know, it's like how are we going to respond if somebody treats us badly or spits at us. And the neighbourhood kid, yeah, little top. Do you mean, like, if someone spits at you, it's gross, right? And you would no doubt feel somewhat offended. And, you know, like, excuse me, you know, I'm more worthy than that. You know, if someone's abusing you and, you know, gives you the shittiest part of the meal, you know, it's like, imagine that with your siblings and they just leave you the burnt remnants in the pot. It'd be like, excuse me. You know, we'd react in some way, right? We're not going to, you know, be all spiritual and stuff, right? So we're going to kind of relate this in our own lives, how we respond due to our understanding of who we are. And so Jada Bharat decided he was going to try and enlighten the king. And my phone's gone on that black mode, that night mode, white type on black. It's not that great. I'll see how I go. Plus the light goes out. So the king told Jada Bharat, "How troublesome this is, my dear brother. You certainly appear very fatigued because you've been carrying this palanquin alone for so long." Hadn't been long at all, and he wasn't alone, right? Besides that, due to your old age, you've become greatly troubled. My dear friend, I see that you're not very firm, not very strong or stout. You rascal, what are you doing? Are you dead despite the life within your body? Do you not know that I am your master? You're disregarding me and not carrying out my order. For this disobedience, I shall now punish you. And Jada Bharat spoke for the first time. He always carried the form of God within his heart, and so he was like really kind. And he didn't entertain any bodily conception, you know, that this is me, this is who I am, you know, any of the kind of stuff that we identify with in our daily life, right? So he smiled to the king and said, "My dear king, whatever you have spoken sarcastically is certainly true. Actually, these are not simply words of chastisement, for the body is a carrier. The load carried by the body does not belong to me, for I am the spirit soul. There is no contradiction in your statements, because I am different from the body. I am not the carrier of the palanquin, the body is the carrier. Certainly, as you have hinted, I have not laboured by carrying the palanquin, for I am detached from the body. You have said that I am not stout and strong, and these words are befitting a person who does not know the distinction between the body and the soul. The body may be fat or thin, but the learned man would say no such thing about the spirit soul. As far as the spirit soul is concerned, I am neither fat nor skinny. Therefore, you are correct when you say that I'm not very stout. Also, if the object of this journey and the path leading there were mine, there would be many troubles for me. But because they relate not to me, but to my body, there is no trouble for me at all. I mean, this is deep stuff. Whatever's going on in our life, it's connected to our body, and it's not who we are. This is just a temporary situation. Is this okay? You cool with this? I think this stuff's amazing. Fatness, thinness, bodily and mental distress, thirst, hunger, fear, disagreement, desires for material happiness, old age, attachment for material possessions, anger, lamentation, illusion, and identification with the body as being the self are all part of the material covering over you, the spirit soul. A person absorbed in the material bodily conception is affected by these things, but I am free from all bodily conceptions. Consequently, I am neither fat nor skinny, nor anything else you have indicated. My dear King, you have unnecessarily accused me of being dead, although I'm alive. In this regard, I can only say that this is the case everywhere, because everything material has a beginning and an end. As far as you're thinking that you're the king and master and are trying to order me, this is also incorrect because these positions are temporary. Today, you're the king and I am your servant, but tomorrow the positions may be changed and you may be my servant and I may be the king. These are temporary circumstances created by providence. So hearing these statements, there's more. Hearing these statements by Jada Bharat, the king was really, modern term, blown away. And he got down from the palanquin and he offered his respects, put his head to the ground as a traditional Vedic way. He offered his respects to Jada Bharat and apologized profusely for having criticized and chastised him, even though he was a saintly person. And he asked him, who are you? Why do you go around the world as if you're deaf and dumb, Have you come here to this world to enlighten us, Who is your teacher? Where have you come from? And Jada Bharat went on to explain to him in depth about our spiritual identity. I mean, the king at that stage was still going, it's like, I can't get my head around some of this stuff, can you explain it some more? And so the king, Jada Bharat spoke at length to the king, explaining more in detail about him being a spirit soul, and nothing in this material world actually touches you, the spirit soul. Right? We identify with the body and the mind, then we're going to experience all sorts of troubles, all sorts of disturbances and anxieties. And he went on to describe how the saintly people come to this world, or we can become enlightened while we're here, and their life is to pass on spiritual knowledge so that we can actually become happy, that we can become enlightened, and we can come to know our eternal spiritual relationship with the eternal spiritual supreme friend. And that is actually the goal of life. Nothing to do with this body, doesn't matter what colour, race, age, sex, anything. Nothing to do with the body and not to do with the mind. We're an eternal spiritual being. And so our human form of life is that opportunity to learn more, take the opportunity to learn more about our spiritual nature and to practice these sacred mantras, these names of God that will purify our heart and mind and simultaneously give us that taste of spiritual happiness so that we can become free. So even though we're living in this world and we've got our responsibilities, we've got our jobs, we've got our families and all sorts of responsibilities we have to engage in, knowing that this is temporary, it actually has nothing to do with me. I'm an eternal spiritual being. I'm not master, I'm not servant. We're eternally servants of the Supreme Person, but in this material world, our situations change. From body to body, like he was in the body of a deer in the last life, he was a body of a king in the life before that, and he was going to making sure he wasn't going to take birth again. And so that's an opportunity that we have in this human form of life, is to take seriously our spiritual life, our spiritual journey. Govinda was telling me today about, there's plenty of elderly Italians around selling flowers today for Mother's Day. And where we grew up, she knew there's a place down the road that always sold flowers. So Govinda went down there today and was talking to the person. And she said, oh, my husband died 3 years ago. And he was perfectly healthy, nothing wrong. But he got up, I'm telling you this for a reason. He got up quickly when the phone rang, and his blood sugar levels, or his blood pressure, didn't go with him. And so he fell, but he cracked his head on the tiles and died. Just like that. So none of us have a contract. She gave the lady a hug and spent some time talking to her. But, it's kind of like, you just never imagine anything that's going to happen, right? And we have this idea that, when I get really old, I'm going to go to sleep and I'm going to die in my sleep and everything will just be fine, Not having any idea that while we're sleeping, things can happen as well, right? But it's just, we don't realise what a precarious situation we're in this material world. So if any of you would like to learn more about this chapter, it's from the ancient Srimad Bhagavatam. Please, you can write your name and email address and I can send you, there's a few chapters on it, and I'm happy to forward you the info if you would like to learn more about this amazing story in the Bhagavatam. Thank you very much.